Everybody, welcome to DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. My name is Brandon Adams. It's good to have you here on what we think is going to be a fun Friday on our broadcast. It's Jeff Sintel coming up in just a moment. We'll get a lot of recruiting talk from him. I'm also going to spend some good time today on the video with your comments on the podcast later on. And one of the things we're going to be talking about there, kind of building off of something that we did earlier this week, my point about Cortez Hankton. And what I said about Hankton earlier in the week was, when you look at how instrumental Hankton has been in some of the recent signings, the wide receiver position, including George Pickens, who we had experts in our show come on during the Pickens recruitment, say that Hankton was kind of an ever-present force in Pickens' life prior to him flipping from Auburn to Georgia. And obviously Pickens has a great freshman season. You see some 2021 guys that might also travel a similar path here this year. What we said is, for Cortez Hankton, who's maybe right now not all that well known in comparison, like, say, Del McGee, the running backs coach, Matt Luke as a former SEC head coach as a replacement for Sam Pittman, we may see Hankton become a little bit more of a fan favorite over the course of the next year or so. And if that's true for Hankton, it's potentially true for a few more guys as well. So over the course of our time together, I'm going to give you reasons why I think three Georgia assistants in particular could be coaching stars in the rise. The defensive version of what I said about Hankton, I think that's probably also true for Trey Scott as well. One point in time, and Jeff will be with us in a minute, when Jeff was here on these regular Friday get-togethers, there was a lot of talk of, oh my gosh, what is wrong with Georgia's defensive line recruitment? Why is Georgia missing on Rick Sandage? Why is Georgia missing on Aubrey Solomon? Why did Georgia miss on Derek Brown? There was a lot of talk about what Georgia wasn't getting from a defensive line perspective. But have you noticed over the course of the last couple of cycles, we're not saying nearly as much anymore about guys that Georgia didn't get. We're putting a long list together of guys that Georgia did get. And here on the field in 2020, those guys could truly be ready to blossom. Admittedly, there is more performance needed, more consistent performance needed from Georgia's defensive line. But with the talent in place, the opportunity for that to happen, I think, can take place. So Scott's one of my guys. And then I'm going to talk about Todd Hartley, the tight ends coach, not just because of the tight ends that Georgia has brought into the program, but what could still also be on the way for 2021 as well. Georgia in the mix for a good number of very impressive tight ends right now. And we'll talk a little bit about Glenn Schumann for a slightly different reason on Schumann's case. But if you're talking about coaching stars in the rise, I think you need to mention him as well. We're going to start from Jeff Sintel on this in just a moment. Before that, let me remind you that DawgNation Daily is brought to you by our friends at Kroger today. They have truly made an exceptional shopping experience for us all as our society and our communities, the community you live in, my community, as we've all dealt with the horrible circumstance around the coronavirus. Kroger has really stepped up to the plate. Every time I go in, the shelves have been stocked. That's no small feat. The stores have been clean. The great care that the workers there at Kroger have taken to make sure that the experience is a safe one and a healthy one for those involved. They've expanded their hours. They've done all kinds of stuff to take care of the people that they serve in their communities. And now they're taking it a step further. They're offering free pickup. That's right. You can go online and order and then schedule your time to show up. And the Kroger folks will just bring your stuff right out to the car to you. It's another way that Kroger's knocking it out of the park during this time dealing with the coronavirus. We really appreciate them being a part of that with us and here on DawgNation Daily as well. With all of that said, let me get ready to welcome in our buddy Jeff Sintel, DawgNation's recruiting insider. Jeff, happy Friday to you. It's a little overcast where I'm sitting here in my humble abode. I hope wherever you are finding health, happiness, and everything else in between.
Yeah, Brandon, good morning, man. I guess we're finding a lot of full shelves at Kroger too, man. I think one of the things we take for granted is like when the shelves are empty or the shelves are full. I used to be a grocery bag person, stock person back in the previous occupational life, and bringing those pallets in off the truck and wheeling them in the storeroom and trying to make sure that you had your weight bill on that day when you brought in the pallet full of sugar. That was something you always think about when you used to work at a grocery store, and obviously now trying to keep up with all the demand. Surely there's tons of late nights and early morning shifts from a lot of those people keeping those shelves stocked.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Jeff, I got a lot of recruiting stuff I want to get to with you, and really I want to talk about a couple of names we haven't mentioned as much about during our interviews here on DawgNation Daily. We'll do that coming up. Let me get a quick thought from you, though, on the topic that I brought up to begin the show. I spoke this week about Cortez Hankton. I think that Hankton has, maybe more so than some people realize, been quite a driving force for why certain receivers have chosen Georgia over the last couple of cycles. And it should not be discounted. how much Georgia has upgraded its wide receiver recruitment over the course of the 2019, 2020 recruiting cycles. This was an underperforming group from a recruiting standpoint for years. That's changed the last couple of cycles. Early playing time to sell has helped that, but whatever the reasons are, Georgia's recruiting better. I think Cortez Hankton, who may not be quite as well known as some other Georgia assistants, the kind of guy that if he's walking the dog walk, maybe doesn't quite get recognized the way that Adele McGee would or a Sam Pittman would have in previous years. I think he could be a coaching star on the rise. I also mentioned a few more. I mentioned Todd Hartley on the offensive side of the ball to go with him. And defensively, what I'll say about Hankton is very similar to what I'll say about Trey Scott. Georgia has emphatically answered the critics who said too many good defensive linemen are slipping out of the grasp of this program. This group has been greatly, from a talent standpoint, upgraded over the course of the last couple of cycles. Those results may bear out on the field here this year. So I'll say that about Trey Scott as kind of a coaching star on the rise. And I mentioned Glenn Schumann a bit there as well. What do you think of my list?
Well, it's funny, Brandon. I love how your wide receiver weather report goes up with a bountiful crop of receivers. I think Cortez Hankton took out the shrimp boat like Forrest Gump did in Bayou La Batre after the hurricane or whatever, and he was the only one reeling in all those receivers. I think Cortez Hankton is a name that I'll be very curious to see whether or not he's prime time this year in terms of, okay, now he's got guys that are going to grab a lot of playing time. Those early slots aren't going to be available. You got at least one more year of George Pickens as the number one receiver. So I think the challenge for Hankton is maybe only signing one or two guys this year, likely two guys, and still having them not be a talent or schematic drop-off from what he needed in the 2020 cycle. Everybody brings up Deion Colsey. That's the young man that's very talented out of Athens Academy, recent Notre Dame decommitment. Irony there on him is that he decommitted, Brandon, so he can open his thing up and see more schools because he made a rash decision. And that's when COVID-19 hit. So it's almost like he got to the green light. He's still waiting on a green light to go see a bunch of schools. Notre Dame remains very strong there in terms of recruiting him. And then the other name that I think is definitely trending away right now, you can think of the Oklahoma Sooners, and you can thank maybe Caleb Williams for that, would be one Mario Williams, the wide receiver in the 2020 class. I think Georgia has gone from a 2021 class, excuse me. I think Georgia's gone from a number 1A, 1B, watched it closely here to it seems like Georgia is no longer at the pole position for Mario Williams at the same time. And
we understand that. I mean, Georgia's got a lot to do to get receivers kind of at the same level of what we saw George Pickens, and I would say Dominic Blaylock to a degree as well. I thought he had a sensational freshman season. But this has been, unfortunately, probably an underachieving. I mean, so much was made last year of the Georgia receivers, what they did or didn't do. But the truth is, this group as a whole had kind of underachieved a bit for a while. And, you know, we make a big deal about the total number of 4- and 5-star players that a program like Georgia signs, and that's part of the picture of success. But sometimes you have to look deeper at that. And if you look at even in years in which Georgia, in some cases predating Kirby Smart, in some cases in the beginning of the Kirby Smart era, even in years in which Georgia had, admittedly, a good class, the degree to which the depth was kind of spread out across all position groups, not always there. And the results we've seen in NFL drafts and years since then have kind of proven that out a bit. Georgia did have more to do with its defensive linemen, did have more to do with its wide receivers. And now the guys that have been brought in will raise the reputations of the coaches that coach them, the position groups overall. So all of a sudden, a guy like Mario Williams has a chance to think about a place like Oklahoma compared to Georgia, or Ajayi Hall has a chance to think about Alabama in comparison to Georgia. All of a sudden, he'll have more of a vision, I think, you hope anyway, of what he would look like in a Georgia uniform. If you're a receiver right now, I can't fault you for being a little skeptical of how Georgia's going to use you, given the fact of how it's used the talent that it has. Or I should say that it had.
Yeah, I think, Brandon, the big thing there is I think the season and whatever we see of it will play out, and it will show a lot of these guys that Georgia is a little bit different. I mean, I can remember talking to recruits. This comes up often when we say when we ask recruits, hey, what do you think about this new Georgia offense? What's it really going to be like with Monken? What are you hearing? And they say all the things, the ball's going to be in the air more. You're going to create mismatches. It's going to look a lot like the NFL in terms of versatile players where, you know, Brandon, when you put people in, it's not a predictable down about what Georgia's going to do. That's why Georgia will probably make a lot of good use of a guy like James Cook, Kenny McIntosh, and Zamir White this year. And then they're recruiting guys like Lavassier Carroll and Donovan Edwards out of Michigan. I think predictability will be a good way to go towards that, where maybe Georgia would have 2 or 3 guys right around the 700, 800, 900 yard mark. Maybe not the magical 1,000 barrier that you're seeking all the time, Brandon. But I think with a lot of these guys, I think what the best thing that Hankton did is he showed he's upgraded his room. Last year, he brought in 2 talented freshmen, and those 2 talented freshmen became arguably easily among the top 4 receivers in the program during their true freshman seasons. And I think he just needs to keep doing that. I'd like to see basically 2 things happen, Brandon. I don't know if you would warrant a guess on this tree limb that I'm about to go off, but if you tell me Arian Smith and you tell me Marcus Roseman and you tell me Jermaine Burton, and then you also include the very vastly underrated Justin Robinson in there in terms of all that too. And you could say you're going to get 2 out of 4, 2 Blaylock Pickens-like seasons out of those 4 guys. I think that's great for Georgia. I think that shows Georgia continuing to add and stack the room up. And I think maybe the biggest criticism so far for Georgia's wide receiver room is they just need to have guys hit like that consistently, Brandon. I think a lot of the warts that we notice sometimes about the production for Georgia at the wide receiver spot, I think that would be different if, like, every year, we're not asking Demetrius Robertson to play like the best receiver in the country like Jamar Chase, but if D-Rob would have played to an all-SEC standard and maybe a Matt Landers or a Tommy Bush. See that thing I'm going with there, Brennan? More hits, 2 out of 3, 2 out of 4. Throw Kearis Jackson in that mix as well. Georgia just needs to consistently find playmakers the same way it does at running back, outside linebacker, and defensive back every year.
We talked when you were with us on Tuesday about the possibility that Barrett Carter could be in the mix for Clemson. That's obviously been kind of out there. I want to look at some of the dominoes that could fall because of that. Let me start with a positive. Does the presence of or the possibility of a guy like Carter ending up at Clemson, does that open the door for – we've talked about Smile Mondon a lot. Obviously, I think that Georgia seems to be, based on your reporting, in good shape with Mondon at the moment. But is a guy like Xavier Sorey more in play if Barrett Carter ends up at a place like Clemson?
Yeah, I think, Brendan, a lot of that was I think a lot of these recruits were paying attention to where Georgia was looking and where people were being prioritized. And I think, man, Barrett Carter's a great player. And I know a lot of folks on here will kick the can or at least want to shave their beards if Barrett Carter does end up at Clemson. But the byproduct of that is I don't think Xavier Sorey Jr. is the pure football player that Barrett Carter is or was. But as far as an athlete goes in terms of range, Xavier Sorey is an athlete upgrade over Carter. And that's kind of saying, putting a couple of Jolly Ranchers in your mouth when you're saying that right there, Brandon. But Xavier Sorey is a guy that it seems like it was Alabama or Georgia for him, and Alabama was leading for a time. That's what we're hearing. But then when things are happening with Carter, where Carter is vectoring in another direction, then all of a sudden it looks like Georgia looks a lot more enviable, perhaps as one of the top 2 inside linebacker, outside linebacker candidates. The thing there about Sorey as well is, man, he's got great length. He's about 6'4", plays basketball a lot. He's a high flyer, sky flyer as well in the basketball court. And you could see him on the field for a lot of downs or even out on the edge for Georgia as well.
Yeah, a lot of our audience, like our most plugged-in listeners and viewers, know how much I love to watch football prospects dunk. Sorey's got some good ones. Now, I don't know that anyone is better than what Henry Ruggs put together. That video got passed around before the NFL draft. Ruggs may have the best collection of football player dunks I've ever seen. But the Sorey dunks, he's got a nice little dunk highlight reel out there, which sort of showcases what you said before, that from an athleticism standpoint, Sorey may be as good as anyone, but it sounds like I'm hearing you say you compare him to Barrett Carter. Carter maybe a little bit more polished and maybe a little bit more finished from a prospect standpoint as a linebacker football player goes right now.
Yeah, that's what you would make. And I mean, it's not like these are wide gaps, but you would give the athletic edge and the size edge to a guy like Xavier Sorey. He was more like Damone Robinson, the guy that committed to Maryland earlier this year. That was a guy Georgia was looking at hard too at the linebacker spot. I think Xavier Sorey is a versatile player. Maybe you could even entertain the thought of having him out on the edge a little bit more. Now, I don't think he's going to play a Sam linebacker or anything like that for Georgia. Mm-hmm. But the other thing there with Carter is, he's an in-state guy. Brandon, it seems like a while since we've we've talked about the Gwinnett County narrative a little bit with Georgia football.
Yep.
In terms of recruiting, but it's one of those things. I still point to this, Brandon. I think we're going to once everything happens and you can recruit these kids again and they can get on campus. And man, I don't see that happening until at least mid-August before that ever happens. But once that happens, Brandon, the only way to say this is these Corona commitments, Brandon, I don't think a lot of them are going to last. The numbers are spiking in terms of there are more Corona commitments through the first week of May than there were commitments through the first week of May in the 19 and 20 classes put together. Yeah. That's definitely something different in the brew here, that in the recipe here, where you just got to understand that a lot of that stuff's going to change.
Don't mean to be negative here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger on a Friday, but honesty compels me to admit that some of the same things I had been hearing for a while about Barrett Carter, I'm now hearing about Nyland Green, a very impressive defensive back prospect from Covington. Jeff, what's going on here?
Well, Nyland is a guy that I don't think he's going to do anything until in November, December. He's a guy that probably want to take all his visits. He's a guy that I've always felt if Georgia pushes really hard that they were probably going to be able to land that guy for a lot of reasons. But again, Brandon, you were talking about Nyland Green, a guy that if we follow all the dots here, Clemson didn't have a lot of luck with a couple of their elite cornerback targets. One of those would be JaQuincy McKinstry out of Alabama. And Brandon, what side road here real fast? Wouldn't it have been great to sign a player whose first name was JaQuincy? Like the first two letters of his name was GA and then a hyphen.
I like it.
Who's basically a versatile, think about a better Prince Miller. I don't know how many people remember the name Prince Miller in Georgia football annals, but a guy that could play some corner, championship program in Alabama, but also can be a good return specialist, potentially do some things on the offensive side of the ball. He's another very talented basketball player as well, but Clemson doesn't seem like they're going to land either of their two top targets or two recently top targets at corner. So then they start looking in terms of, looking over at Georgia, seeing what they can grab across the border. They got a history of getting a couple of players from Newton over the last few years. But the thing to think about there, Brandon, is I know, bad news, good news, but reminder here, Nyland Green, for all of his talent, I think 24/7 has him as the nation's number 3 overall corner, while the pure composite rating is a little bit lower, maybe number 8, number 9. We're again talking about a player who's still the second, or at best the third most prioritized defensive back in Georgia's class. I think he would be having much more gray hair in that beard, Brandon, if you were hearing online chatter about James Williams or Tony Grimes going to another area. So with that, I think, Tony's a guy. He's a guy that's been on the scene, Brandon, for 2 years. He's always been really long and really fast. Probably a better press man corner than a guy that has his toolkit together, that knows all the nuances of off man, off ball, his jam, that sort of thing. But definitely a skilled player. And for Georgia, I'm just going to reiterate this, Brandon. If Georgia were able to land a Williams to go along with the Daniel, to go along with the Grimes, and then to go along with a Nyland Green as well, man, those things about DBU are going to start to take seed and really take stock there for Georgia, because sooner or later you're going to look at this Georgia defensive back class and you can see a lot of names, like 5 or 6 names out of the secondary, getting drafted very highly in the near future.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And I guess the point I'm kind of building to here is I'm more fascinated by this than I am worried about it or concerned about it from the standpoint of a Georgia fan. But it seems like this is like the most classic Georgia recruiting story of all time, that Georgia may not be in the best shape with Green, but has an unbelievable relationship with a defensive back out of South Florida, unbelievable relationship with a 5-star cornerback out of Virginia. It's like, Georgia's brand could not be bigger with guys like Grimes and Williams, who were, as you said, in the comparison here, they're the elite players, and yet somehow Georgia's sort of fighting for a seat at the table for the in-state prospect. It's almost like if Georgia didn't have this national reputation, then the recruiting would be in trouble. But if they recruited in-state players as well as they recruit the rest of the country, half the teams in the nation wouldn't even be able to field a team, because Georgia would have just signed everybody at that point in time. So it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. You want good players. Georgia's clearly getting them. But it's really interesting that here we are in 2021 talking about something very similar to Darnell Washington compared to Rick Gilbert from last cycle, or George Pickens compared to Jaden Hazelwood for the previous cycle of Georgia just having a better relationship with the elite prospect out of state than it seems to have with the very good prospect in state.
Yeah, it seems to me like a college economics class, Brandon, where for a time there, it certainly seemed like Georgia was able to be the program that recruits a prospect like no other for 7 or 8 guys in the class. And sooner or later, you run out of coaches and GAs and time. But in the age of COVID-19, a lot of all these prospects and a lot of these coaches have a ton of time to make them feel like they're prioritized. And yeah, I would say that whatever mojo that matriculates right now in terms of Clemson making a full court press on a guy like Nyland Green, I kind of equate it to Brandon, Georgia's staff and recruiting and not getting a chance to host players, not getting a chance to entertain players. That's kind of like you, man, doing a show where I say, I got a few governors for you, Brandon. You can't talk about running backs. You can't talk about wide receivers.
Sure.
You can't talk about the Florida Gators. And you also you can't talk about your children, or Darth Vader. So you place those governors on you. What kind of output are you going to have there?
I think that's probably a pretty fair point. And I don't want to get it twisted. I do get the sense the 2021 class is going to have a lot more of an in-state flair than the 2020 did. I just more think it's interesting, this particular recruitment, how similar it looks to some previous Georgia storylines. But overall, probably more Georgia kids in this class. Let me make one more sort of half serious, half not serious point about the program, the nemesis we're talking about, Clemson, here for a moment. I think it's really funny that, Kirby Smart and Dabo Swinney have been going head-to-head and fighting over recruits for a while. I guess now it looks like Georgia baseball coach Scott Strickland may be in for the same kind of battle here. I saw where Bubba Chandler, a quarterback prospect from the Athens area, has been now offered by Clemson. I guess, according to some of the reading I was doing coming out of Clemson on this is directly related to them not making the finalist list for Caleb Williams. So they offered Chandler from the Athens area. You'll talk about another reason why Clemson needs to be taken down a peg. Not only are they making things hard on the Georgia football program, but now not even Scott Strickland, the Georgia baseball program, are safe as well because Chandler is a UGA baseball commit. Yeah,
so I think that's very interesting, Brandon, because let's face it, they did sign a whopper of a quarterback in the last class in DJ Ungale. So I would wonder, Q rating wise, Brandon, does it mean more to go compete behind a 5-star at Clemson at quarterback or be a baseball player at the University of Georgia? Georgia's pedigree for developing first-round talent is coming up really strong under Scott Strickland over the last couple of years. And they likely could have had, remember some of those mock drafts where you saw that Georgia might have the number 1 overall pick and then the next MLB first-year amateur player draft. That'll be very interesting because, Georgia can't play ball with the 2021 quarterback, even one in its backyards. First of all, Brandon, let's do this. Let's just take a moment and size up maybe this is my Seinfeld moment. What are the odds? What are the odds of a quarterback good enough to play at Georgia?
I was going to say this.
Are happening in Clark County. I
was going to say this. For the people, we talk about Athens all the time, so we have a tendency to equate it to New York City because of how often we talk about the city. But the truth is, from a population, geographic standpoint, it's barely bigger than a dot on the map. And not only do you have 2 really good quarterbacks in that area right now between Chandler and obviously Vandergriff, Deion Colsey, the elite wide receiver prospect who's got his choice of anywhere he can go, was a former Notre Dame commit, obviously on the radar for Georgia. Athens is a very small community, much smaller than we view it as because of the fact that it houses the University of Georgia. But to have 2 national elite program level quarterback recruits, to have Colsey, the wide receiver prospect, Athens is standing up for itself right now on the recruiting trail. I got to give a shout out to the Classic City for that. I'm not gonna lie.
And Brandon, I know your viewership goes nationwide and worldwide, and not everybody knows the Georgia geography like others. But a few stating of facts here: Clark County is the smallest county in the state of Georgia, and then also, unless somebody was incorporated recently, and then or county, made a county. What's the term for that when you make a county a county? I don't know. I digress. But the thing there is, I think the population of Athens is only like 80,000, and like it's 50,000 when school. 50,000 of that is because when school is in session, and you've got the odds of having 2 quarterbacks, Brandon.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you feel about this, but it's almost a little too close for comfort when somebody like Nyland Green is only like 90 minutes or 60 minutes away from Athens, because some guys just want to get away. They want to be a little bit farther away from mom and dad for college. And for Georgia, if you have that many elite prospects in Clark County, and to think that Georgia could get 2 out of the 3 with Brock Vandegrift and Deion Colsey, that kind of goes against kind of the common logic in terms of sometimes you don't want to go to college 10 minutes away from mom and dad's supper table, unless you got a really big aversion to laundry. And for Georgia to already have Brock Vandegrift in the class and recruiting so hard and working so hard, that's one of the things, Brendan, I don't know if you noticed over the last week, but it seems like the Georgia coaches can't recruit as hard right now or can't make their impact known. So it seems like these recruits and even some current players on the team are deciding, to pull up their bootstraps and basically say, hey, we're going to recruit some of these guys too, because we want to leave the defensive line room, the defensive back room in good shape when we're gone. And we want to let them know that they're needed and they can really help the program immediately. That's different, Brandon. This is one of the things about different in, Corona recruiting. I've never seen, like the Mims thing earlier this week, Brandon, I've never seen a coordinated attack. And when we had Lavassier Carroll on Before the Hedges this week, he basically said the coaches flipped them an edit of a couple of guys. Chaz Chambliss out of Fields got one as well. And they said, hey, guys, we want you to just show them love on social media so the fans know who we want, so we know who we want. And so they get a sense that they're definitely wanting to be a part of the class. I'm sure there's some psychology in that where everybody feels loved and everybody feels like they belong. And the other thing is, Brandon, we used to see those edits. Those were shared by recruits. And now they don't even have to do that self-serving act of popping out, hey, Georgia's showing love, Florida's showing love. They don't even have to deal with that anymore because right now, Georgia's commitments are doing some of that stuff for them on social media.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I've kept you long. I want to do one more thing before I let you go. You mentioned the Lavassier Carroll interview. I'll ask folks to go check that out, DawgNation video channels, Facebook, YouTube. It's also available now as a podcast, wherever you find those. So check out the Before the Hedges presented by Kroger edition this week for a nice interview with Georgia running back commit Lavassier Carroll. Instead, Jeff, let me go to a different topic to say goodbye here. Our friends on the radio, both in Atlanta on News 95.5 and AM 750 WSB, and, of course, in the Classic City there in Athens, home of the Dogs, 960 The Ref. Tomorrow at 3:05, they're going to replay the 1991 Georgia-Clemson game. This is a really fun game for me because I remember very well that day going to Athens to see Georgia beat top 5 ranked Clemson team, Ken Hatfield, the coach of the Tigers, one of the big wins of the 90s in Sanford Stadium for the Georgia Bulldogs. And same day the Braves clinched the National League West for the first time. That great run the Braves started began that same day. So I've got really good memories of that day. But, Jeff, all these years later, a chance to listen to a game like this in the afternoon, and so many people do this kind of stuff, in their own way anyway. To go back and hear Larry Munson call a game, and Jeff, I know Munson's special. You got a chance to work with him in your younger days for a while. To know that, to hear Munson call a game, it's not the big highlights. It's not the run Lindsey. It's not the look at the sugar falling down the sky. It's just the way he managed the game in kind of the quiet moments, the Dixie Crystal Sugar scoreboard and all those things he would kind of call for during the game. It's sort of the Munson at 3/4 speed that I miss the most sometimes, just the ease with which he handled the broadcast. I'd give anything to be able to still, hear him from time to time. Obviously, I've got great memories, and to get a chance to relive this on the weekend with our friends there on the Bulldog Radio Network is a lot of fun.
Yeah, Brandon, that's a good call. I think anytime you can get Munson on a Saturday, I mean, there's been a lot of, retro time vault or open up the vault moments recently with Georgia football and a lot of platforms. But I think you kind of described it the way I think of Munson as well, is like just when he's working the corners, man, he doesn't have to, drop a big slider on you or drop a, get split finger pitch on you or whatever, or the moving fastball. But when he's just sitting there, and I don't know about you, but sometimes, Brandon, when we go by the sugar aisle, I'm like, you look for that Dixie Crystal thing. Because when anybody says, let's check, and it used to be the AJC scoreboard as well, but it's like, let's check that Dixie Crystal Sugar scoreboard. And I'm like, when I hear Dixie Crystal Sugar, I swear if somebody's got like my Apple Watch or whatever, my pulse will probably pop up about 5 or 10 beats per minute. And you hear him talking about, that they've got the best hold kick team in the country, how they get the ball off so much faster, their holder and kicker, and how their tight ends have the best hands in the country and everything. I mean, the consternation. If there was a DawgNation Daily way back then, would we be talking about Ken Hatfield coming into Georgia and taking prospects or not allowing commitments?
Yeah, listen, it's good stuff and it's great memories. We appreciate them tomorrow afternoon playing that for us. So if you're in Atlanta, check that out on AM 750 and News 95.5. You get a chance to hear that. And of course, I said with our friends in Athens there on Athens Home for the Dog 96 The Ref, a lot of fun there as well if you're in that Classic City area. So good stuff, Jeff. Hope you're getting ready for a great weekend. We appreciate you being with us, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again next week as well.
Brandon, you jogged my mind on one question. So the 91 Braves Georgia win day of your life. Can you think of a better Georgia sporting day for you personally than that day when Georgia beat Clemson and the Braves clinched the NL West?
Well, I can tell you this. It was not when the Braves won the World Series in 1995, because that same day Georgia got throttled by Florida. So it wasn't that day. Certainly to that point in time, I never had a better sporting day. I remember being, we used to go over to Pendergrass and get on Athens Highway there to go into Athens for game day. And I remember listening to that Braves game on the radio, driving down there. I remember when the Tomahawk Chop first began, you had the Georgia fans and the Clemson fans doing that together in Sanford Stadium, because obviously that part of the South Carolina upstate, big part of Braves country, so to speak. So you had that brief moment where the two fan base were united. I'll tell you one more thing I remember about this game, Jeff, and at this point in time, we're moving into a marathon interview, but this is not necessarily a good thing. It's just kind of funny. Back then, Georgia put all the Clemson fans together in the lower level. The end zone kind of below the bridge, which is now a sort of a secondary student section, all of the visiting fans got tucked right in there in that end zone. It just goes to show you, sometimes we're all not very smart. It was certainly not smart to put that many Clemson fans in one spot down there in the corner. When Georgia would be on that end of the field, it was truly like a road game. I was like, what is going on here? How could people not, realize this wasn't a good idea? You don't have that many away fans anymore, but when there are away fans, they're way up in the air in the 600 level. They can't make enough noise to impact the game. But you put them down there in the lower level, especially in the end zone. Clemson had a very impactful crowd in that game. Georgia didn't take very long to realize you had to start breaking people up. You couldn't put them all together like that. That's another memory I have. Every time Georgia got down to that end zone, it was like they had to go on the silent count in their own stadium because all the Clemson fans were sitting right there together.
Yeah, if we see that again, Brandon, you think that 600 level will have a lot more orange in
Maybe so. Yeah, maybe so. We've gotten a lot smarter in terms of how we neutralize away fans in other stadiums. Of course, for Georgia fans, they're hard to neutralize in away stadiums because they just have so many of them. But we've long since moved past the days when everybody's kind of packed in together in the same part of the stadium, because you put a bunch of people together, they'll start making a lot more noise.
That's true. That's correct. And yeah, that's great to bring up the 91 Munson. Folks, listen. If you're a young cat, you've never listened to Munson, this is the weekend to do that. Pull up a chair, get it on your earbuds. You're walking around, you're doing something this weekend. Get some classic Munson in your life this weekend, man. You'll be glad you did.
All right, good stuff, Jeff. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, man. Be well.
Good stuff there. It is DawgNation's recruiting insider, Jeff Sintel. Always fun to have him as a part of DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. By the way, speaking of Kroger, let me give a shout out to them real quick. They got a great deal right now on patio furniture. Now, one thing you may be aware of is we're heading towards Mother's Day. There's no really better gift for Mother's Day than patio furniture, especially if you feel quarantined in your home right now. When the weather's nice, you still have the chance to be outside, enjoy your back deck, your front porch, whatever else, and new furniture gives you a chance to do that. So let me tell you about the great deal that Kroger has in this regard right now. How about you can save up to 40% on patio table sets, outdoor swings, lanterns, a whole lot more. Make the outside enjoyable with some brand new outdoor furniture. For our friends at Kroger, stop by the one closest to you and check out those great savings today. All right, long with Jeff, but still time for your comments. So we'll do that here on both Facebook and YouTube, and hopefully back in our studios again very soon with a chance to be back on Twitter and just the regular broadcast, as I love to be able to do it. So we'll pop over here on Facebook. We'll say hello to a few folks, and we'll hit you up on YouTube there as well. You can pretty well talk about anything you want to from today's show. We'll give you a chance to do that. Jennifer Caldwell-Sperlin asked an interesting question. I've seen other people bring this up. Are the top fan badges just gone now? The honest truth is I've never known much about that, how you get one, how you lose one, whatever else. Are they just gone now? I don't know that, but I've heard other people mention that. Bill Kelly says that when Munson was the play-by-play announcer, he never used the TV audio. He would always turn that TV down and listen to Munson. And back then, it was a lot easier to do that. Now, if you want to sync up radio with TV because of the huge delay, I mean, it's amazing how delayed these TVs are now. Like sometimes it seems like 10, 15 seconds compared to the real time on the field, especially if you're in the stadium watching on TV. You notice that a lot more about how long the delay is. So you have to kind of time your DVR up if you want to do that now. But in the old days, it was a lot easier to listen to Munson and watch the game. And I know a lot of people did that as well. I also grew up in a time, and for those of you who are younger than me, this may be hard to imagine. Excuse me. I grew up in a time in which not every game was on television. In portions of the 80s, a lot of these games weren't on television because it seemed like half the SEC was on probation all the time, and they couldn't be on TV. I want to say even a Georgia-Florida game at one point in time was not televised because Florida was on probation. So a lot of these games couldn't be on TV because you're playing, some SEC team on probation, and they were taken off TV. Auburn in 1993 wasn't allowed to be televised. That game was radio only. So it was a different time. And then also the TV packages themselves just weren't quite as robust. Speaking of Braves memories, I remember, in the 1992 World Series, 92 World Series for the Braves against the Blue Jays on television, Georgia against Kentucky, radio only. You got the TV going here. You got the radio with the dogs and the cats. I think it was in Lexington that particular year. You had, that's just kind of the way it was. Munson was a huge figure, not just because of his personality, but because of the fact that in a lot of ways, 80s, early 90s, the radio was the only way to access those games. So that's a really good point. Really good point. Let me get some more. James Crump talking about a nice combination of some guys in that front for the defense. Mason Smith, Corey Foreman, Somerville, a young man out of Arizona. That'd be a good group. Michael Webb said he had top fan badge about 3 weeks ago. Stopped getting notifications on Facebook and couldn't find the show. He says, I lost it that way. I'm guessing they still exist. Well, Michael, I'm sorry about that. The notification thing is also weird as well. We don't have control over who gets notifications, who doesn't. That's a Facebook thing. Certainly seems like, it's erratic about who does and who doesn't. So I apologize. Just know this. We're always here at 10 a.m. I've taken one day off since this started. We are always, always here. So if Facebook doesn't tell you we're live, that doesn't mean we're not live. We are always, always here. If I'm going to take a day off, I will tell you. I'll tweet it out. I'll mention it on the show. And over the course of the last 5 years of doing the show, there's nobody in media that's taken fewer days off than I have. So assume that we're here. Don't make Mark Zuckerberg, tell you we're live or not. Zuckerberg sitting out in a mansion somewhere in California has no idea. Assume we're here. Come find us if you need to. But we appreciate you checking in. I'm sorry you lost your top badge. What else? Craig Hill says that Georgia always starts recruiting slow compared to other schools. I joked with Jeff on this on Tuesday that the new recruiting momentum is not taking commits. And I won't even say Georgia on this for a moment. Look at Alabama. Alabama, I think, has, 3 pledges, something like that. They're ranked, obviously, very low right now. Does anybody think, I'd love for this to be true, but does anybody think it is true that Alabama's not going to get an elite class, not going to finish very strong in recruiting? I don't think any of us probably think that's true. I think we think that Alabama's probably heading for a pretty impressive class, all things considered. The fact that they're choosing to wait means they have a pretty good idea who their targets are. For a program like Tennessee, which is like 18 commits right now, they're going to either do one of two things. This is not a pleasant thing to think about, but it's probably true, that Pruitt's going to try to replace some of the guys they currently have in their class. They're trying to create the illusion of scarcity to sort of get other guys to jump in. And some of the guys, the lesser recruits, may look to be replaced eventually. That's an unfortunate byproduct, but the truth of how recruiting plays itself out. And if it doesn't play it out that way, then Tennessee, which is ranked very high in recruiting because of the number of commits that it has, it's going to fall down the rankings. Same thing was true for Florida a couple of weeks ago. That was bragging and bragging and bragging. Their coaches were even out. Hey, look at our recruiting ranking right now. But as other programs start taking their commits, if you're sitting there at a, low 4-star average or a, 3-star, type average, you'll fall in the recruiting ranking. So one of those things is going to be true. And as Jeff said, it has gotten some national attention lately how many players have committed to various schools compared to, previous cycles when there was a certain pace established. The pace this year for commits for a lot of programs coming far quicker. But if you do have a lot of decommitments, and if it comes across as the kind of forced decommitment, I wonder how much negative attention the programs that are involved in that are going to get because of the heightened awareness we have of who's committed and who's not at the moment. I mean, just to be frank, when Georgia built its #1 recruiting class in 2018, Georgia had a slew of decommitments as well. For the most part, that kind of flew below the radar. No one really noticed the fact that Georgia offered a lot of guys, got them in the class, and then slowly but surely they kind of worked their way out of the class. Some of those guys are actually, doing really well other places, but you had some of that. Georgia didn't really get dinged for it too much nationally, but with more attention being paid to some of that kind of stuff this year, I wonder if some of the programs that are involved do get a little bit more of a sign on their back because of that. Let me roll into our R.S. Andrews cool down, remind you that R.S. Andrews, Dari and the whole team over there, story after story, they've been delivering smiles. That means they do good work for you when you're dealing with some sort of issue with your heating system or your air conditioning, plumbing, or electrical issue. R.S. Andrews can handle all of that, and they do quality work. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. It also means that if your water heater goes out, I use this example a lot, in many cases, they can replace it for you the same day. So check them out online, rsandrews.com, as we roll into our R.S. Andrews cool down here. All right, let us see what's going on, and we'll get some of your comments on YouTube here after a nice little run there on Facebook. Then after that, we've got to get ready for the podcast and roll on for today. George Herndon, good to have you checking in. Memphis Dog says, I think we'll have to fight Bama for a few of our recruits, but Clemson's the biggest competition. Yeah, I think that's true. I love how you say that. There's obviously some head-to-head going on with Georgia and Alabama. Clemson's a nemesis because of the fact that it just goes about its business a different way. And I'll give Dabo some credit for this. He's established a nice brand. It's one of the reasons why you like when Kirby Smart touts on the Paul Feinbaum show the softness of the competition they're playing against and the way in which the best of the SEC is made better by playing tough competition. You like Smart saying that. You relish the opportunity in the future to get a chance to play Clemson again. So you can do on the field what you're trying to do in recruiting, which is take them down a peg. But for the moment, you got to take your hat off to Clemson. They've built a nice brand, a recruiting empire that's slightly different than the way that Georgia goes about its business. And clearly because of they're closer geographically to Atlanta than a lot of people realize. And they can kind of use that to their advantage a bit there as well. So, yeah, all the way around, it's a nemesis that you got to tangle with. Memphis Dog says he's getting old because he remembers those months on radio-only days. Yeah, you and me both, Memphis, on that. You and me both. Let's get a couple more here. Real Boss says, I wonder why they stopped the rivalry that was brewing between Georgia and Clemson. That was some good games. Yeah, so not to turn this whole thing into nostalgia, but when I was a kid in the 80s, the SEC was a 10-team conference, and you only played 6 conference games. This is very different from what college football would look like even a few years later. 10-team conference, you played 6 conference games. That means Georgia every year was playing 5 non-conference games. And so you'd have your, you'd have your William and Mary type game or whatever else. But Georgia was always playing Georgia Tech. Back then, it was always playing South Carolina, who was not an SEC member in the 80s, always playing South Carolina and always playing Clemson. So your traditional schedule included those teams that you played every year, the Clemsons, the South Carolinas. But when the SEC went to a 12-team conference, all of a sudden you added that extra conference game. Back then, coaches were not going to play a tougher schedule than they had to. So all of a sudden, you could not play the Clemson game every year anymore. But and then also for a while, you got to keep this in mind. For most of the 90s, you're only playing an 11-game schedule. In 2002, Georgia played a 12-game schedule, and I think it just had to do with how many Saturdays there were between Labor Day and Thanksgiving. I think that's what it had to do with. You allowed for the extra date But in 2002, Georgia picked up on a 12-game schedule again, and lo and behold, Clemson popped back on for a home and home. Georgia won both those games. And then after that, you pretty much play 12 games every year because, let's face it, 12 games means all the more money for a program. But part of the reason why the Clemson series disappeared off the Georgia schedule was the SEC schedule was growing, and there was a commitment to maintaining an 11-game schedule for a while. But when you had those off years in 02 and 03 with the 12-game schedule, Georgia and Clemson was back on again. But that's kind of what that was all about. Let's do a couple more here. Ace Dog says, don't forget about the hobnail boot game from Munson. Yeah, I was lucky enough to be at that game. And I did not learn about the hobnail boot part of it until many hours later. You're getting in the car to drive home from Knoxville, and you're hearing, did you hear the Munson call? Because this is pre-social media, things like that. You would not have been aware of anything like that until you, in many cases, hours later. But I remember that very well. Lucky to have been at that one. Light Dog 1968 on Brett McMurphy, the reporter on the Feinbaum show yesterday. Yeah, McMurphy is kind of touching on something that I think is important, that for all the bluster at the beginning about, hey, we can't have college football if there's no students on campus, a lot of those stances seemingly are starting to soften as people realize just how catastrophic to the bottom line it'll be if there is no football. So, for all the grandstanding about who can sort of compete to take coronavirus the most serious, ultimately, a lot of these athletic directors are going to, ultimately try to do right by their bottom line, which means there's going to be football. And I sort of assume that's always where we'd land on this. Always where we'd land. Let me go back over to Facebook, and we'll get ready to wrap up here on this Friday on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. See Fazo on the subject of the Tennessee recruiting momentum. Yes, some Georgia fans, I think, have had some fun with that, just watching how kind of silly Tennessee has sort of been about all of this. Chad Buchanan says Georgia needs James Williams and Tony Grimes. I'd agree with you on that for sure. Matt Rukavina says you got to agree that the hobnail boot, best call of all time. I think it is good. I'll tell you an underrated Munson call. Go find the call of his after the walk-off win against Georgia Tech in '97. That's not quite as well known. The Corey Allen catch from Mike Bobo. But that's a very similar, in my mind, similar call to the hobnail boot. I think the '97 win versus Georgia Tech is kind of an underrated Munson call. Clearly, though, hobnail. I've always thought that the hobnail boot was Larry Munson's version of Jack Nicklaus winning the '86 Masters. You know how, for Nicklaus, the great moments of his career had happened years and years early. For Munson, the same way. The 80, run Lindsay, the 82, look at the sugar falling from the sky. You go back to 76, the Appleby to Washington, some of that kind of stuff. The great moments seemingly had happened years before, but here in kind of the winter of his career, Larry Munson put together a Nicklaus at the Masters 86 type moment with one of them, maybe the most memorable moment from his career that late into the career. I think that's kind of a cool thing to see. I guess you can compare that to Tom Watson almost getting it done at the British Open as well in '09. But in this particular case, Munson definitely got it done there. So this is fun stuff. By the way, I want to address this and we got to go because I'm running super long late. Vengeance Gilbert says, what happened to Zach Evans? I don't know, but I'm really fascinated by this. I know Evans was on, I guess, Instagram the other day, and some Tennessee fans were on there talking to him. He kind of laughed at them. Basically, like some Tennessee fans said, hey, you better get with the Vols or get run over, and Evans kind of laughed. It is interesting. If my count's correct, Tennessee's got 4 running back commits already for the class of 2021. That's a lot of running backs. And as Jeff pointed out, they're still sending out running back offers, too. Something about that's a little bit weird. But it stands to reason if you take 4 running back commits for 2021, you must not think you're getting Zach Evans. I'm just reading between the lines on this. So does that mean it's down to Ole Miss and Florida for Evans? Is Evans going anywhere? I don't know, but I have been thinking about that lately. I have been thinking, I'll admit that. All right, we got to go. Fun stuff. Appreciate you all being here. Really good stuff. Appreciate that. All right, we got to get ready to go. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Thanks to Kroger for making DawgNation Daily possible today. Make sure you check out the AJC online at ajc.com. Get your Atlanta news now. There is some great, great stuff in the AJC. A fun look at the Falcons schedule as that just came out yesterday. Also some serious stuff, and no way to say this other than just horrible, horrible tragedy unfolding at a part of the state that I love. Brunswick, the Golden Isles, just one of my favorite places in the world is that area near the Georgia coast. Brunswick is just a wonderful community, and they have been rocked by a horrible, horrible tragedy that's angered, justifiably, it would seem. So many people are around our state, around our world. All the latest on that situation you can read at ajc.com as well. It is an important story to follow, and the AJC doing an incredible job of doing that. Thank goodness for local reporting in a time like this, both in Atlanta with the AJC covering our state, obviously they're on the scene there in Brunswick as well. So tough situation, but certainly prayers out to all involved. Thank you all for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here today. We appreciate that. We hope you're getting ready for a great weekend. To the ladies who are listening, happy Mother's Day to you. In particular, happy Mother's Day to my mom, who's a frequent visitor to our program here, and I'm always really glad to have her, and I look forward to celebrating with her, hopefully this weekend as well, and in some form or fashion through video conferencing or whatever else. I hope you get a chance to connect with your mom. And for those of you that aren't able to do that, we certainly will keep you in our prayers as well. Thank you so much for being here. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Have a great weekend, everybody.